Hello, welcome to this video. My name is Jonathan Curtis, and in this video I'm going to continue my series of videos taking an educational look at some of the pieces in my collection. Over the past few years I've been working closely with Arts Council England on a number of projects, exploring compositional approaches to the snare drum, producing my own work, performing that work, and then discussing it on an educational level. And that is what this video is. I'm exploring the piece called Attainment today, which is another one from my recent collection from a publication called Snare Drum Compositions Volume 2 with the subtitle Meditations. As I said in my video discussing the piece Jhana, it is possible to overwork that metaphor, but I essentially loosely used the theme of meditation to define such things as the title, some of the sounds I chose, and some of the thematic and aesthetic choices for the pieces themselves. So attainment is based on the sense of attaining certain levels of concentration within the act of meditation. It is also a loose nod to the sense of attainment we seek when working on a musical instrument. We need to attain certain degrees of technical facility, musical understanding, and confidence to perform the music we want to perform. Attainment seeks to evoke a sense of trance-like concentration and meditation, and this informed some of the choices in terms of the sound as well as the vocabulary, which I will come on to shortly. So when I performed this piece, I performed my own part on a field drum, a 15x8 Pearl Philharmonic field drum, to produce a nice dry sound, which combined with the use of rolls really helped evoke that sound I was looking for. Attainment is also the only piece in the collection that does not use the mid-tone taiko or conga drum like the other four pieces in this collection. Instead, it used the low-toned bass drum, a high-toned woodblock, but instead of that conga or taiko drum, we used a drone, an acoustic drone produced by a large tam-tam, played with large mallets, soft felt beaters, which produced this nice, warm, dark wash, this acoustic drone that sat behind the piece for the whole performance. And that worked really nicely, I think. It was a nice change of pace from the three-part accompaniment that features in the other four pieces. So everything here is trying to, as I say, evoke this sense of trance-like concentration, including the vocabulary. So we'll come on to that in a moment. Attainment is in 12/8 time. This is typically felt as four groups of 3/8 notes per measure: 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. However, I decided to set this at a slightly lower tempo and instead use four groups of 6 16th notes instead. Da 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 da. And this helps to define the metric structure for this piece. In terms of its compositional work, it's actually rather simple. There are only two basic sections. There are roll-based sections and there are flam-based sections. And it generally uses traditional rudimental vocabulary, unlike perhaps Jhana and some of the others which explore more modern or orchestral vocabulary. This piece is very simple in its use of phrases, in its use of figures, and its use of rudiments. It essentially uses rolls, flams, and two types of drags. It uses closed drags and it uses open drags, which is something I will come on to shortly. It is essentially used as a vehicle to express the theme of syncopation. So all of the snare drum phrasing uses measured groupings, which I've talked about at great length before, numbered groupings of notes to syncopate the accents in unexpected and unfamiliar ways. So to offset this, the rhythm and the meter is grounded in its use of accompaniment. So the bass drum especially, the drone obviously in the background, and the accentuation in the high-toned woodblock in the accompanying parts is used to ground that meter and solidify where the beat is, and this frees up the snare drum to break away from that. So this theme of syncopation plays heavily in the snare drum's phrasing. So let's have a look at how this is achieved. I'm looking at the first section here from bars 5 to 8. 5, 6, 7, and 8, 4-bar section. And this, as I said, is based on the subdivisions of 4 groups of 6 per bar. Now, 4 groups of 6, of course, equates to 24. So I used 4 24-note phrases to produce the general passage that runs from bars 5 to 8 in the opening section. These are permutated such that they run in the first bar 11, 7, 3, 3, 7, 11, 3, 3 in the second bar, 11, 7, 3, 3 again in the third, and then 7, 5, 3, 3, 5 with an additional accent at the end to produce 4 chunks of 24 16th notes. Now, this all sounds like a lot, but you have to remember that this both informs the position of the accents as well as the sticking used to perform it. So in other sections and in other pieces, I often use a measured roll approach, which I discussed in Jhana, and I will discuss again shortly for the second section here. But for this opening section, I used a simple single stroke roll. Very simple. I play a numbered roll, I play single strokes, and I accent on the number 1 of each grouping. So just for argument's sake, a 6-note grouping would sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A 7-note grouping is just 1 note longer, but the speed remains the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then a 3 would be much shorter, but again, with the same speed. So when we see this phrase 11, 7, 3, 3, we have a phrase that is 11 notes long, accent at the beginning. One that is 7 notes long, accent at the beginning. And then the 2 3s equating to our 24 16th notes within that measure. Now, because I used a lot of rolls in this piece to try to generate this almost monotonous droning sound on the snare drum as well, the interim strokes, the non-accented strokes between the accents, are doubled to become 32nd notes. So if I play the opening bar, we hear this slightly disguised 11, 7, 3, 3. There's our 11. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. What we're doing here is listening to the position of the accents. As I say, this is all designed to syncopate away from the main beat, because our bass drum in this opening section is really emphasizing that pulse. So we are using these rolled groupings to jump away from that. So if I play the opening section here, the first 4 bars, you can try to count the accents. Remember, every accent falls on a 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We're trying to count those accents and hear the underlying 16th note groupings. And this gives us the basic phrasing for our initial section, and this is a device that I used in later sections as well. This rolled approach using rolled single strokes is something that informed much of the vocabulary through this piece. Now, you will hear sometimes in there accents that are 16th notes, and then sometimes an accent with a pause. So in fact, in the opening bar, the initial 11 has an 8th note for the accent. So there is a pause after that accent. And the 7 that comes after it as well. You can hear a slight pause after I play each accent. Whereas when we get to the 2 3s at the end, there's no pause. So they are using 16th note accents, as you can see in the notation. So running through this piece, some of the accents become 8th notes, some of the accents stay as 16th notes, and this all helps drive that sense of syncopation where the 16th notes flow nicely through the phrases, whereas the 8th note pause serves to emphasize that often syncopated position of the accent. In that second bar, for example, the second phrase, the 7, begins on the last 16th note of the second beat. So having an 8th note pause after that really helps to emphasize that sense of anticipation coming before the beat. As we progress through this, I maintain the single stroke sticking, but I do away with the rolls, and this helps to slow the tempo, slow the pace, and lower the intensity a little bit. The tempo does stay the same, but it gives this effect of slowing down because we do away with those 32nd note rolls and we retain 16th note singles. We have a phrase that runs 7 5 3 3 5 5 3 3 5 7. You can see it on screen here, but this time Every accent is an eighth note except one of the threes in there, but there are no rolls until the very end. So as I say, we get this slowing effect where single strokes are playing everything. Against the underlying meter, that's a very syncopated phrase. Virtually none of the accents actually sit on the beat itself. And this gives this sense of movement and uncertainty in the timing, as I say, that is grounded by the use of the bass drum underneath that. And these are two devices that I use throughout the entire piece. As we progress through into the second section, as I say, we start encountering flam-based vocabulary. And this is where, using the same numbered approach, we switch the sticking concept. So up until this point, we have used single strokes either with or without additional double strokes. Whereas from this section, we start using measured rolls instead. So this is using a 5-stroke roll for a 5-stroke grouping, a 7-stroke roll for a 7-stroke grouping, and as I often like to do, a Swiss triplet sticking for a 3 and a flam tap for a 2. So a 3-stroke grouping would be a Swiss triplet. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Whereas a flam tap allows us to play consecutive 2-stroke groupings. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So running from the third eighth note of bar 18, we have a passage that runs 3, 3, 5, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 3, 5, 5. And this defines the position of the accents, and also, because we're following this measured roll sticking, defines the sticking as well. So from bar 18, listen to the first accent and start counting the groups. So as I say, the vocabulary used here is really quite simple. There is nothing outside of that really features in this piece. I think there are 1 or 2 sections of fast single strokes, but they are just used for effect rather than any compositional device. So the main essence of this piece is in the use of rolled single strokes or flammed measured rolls, both of which express these numbered groupings with a purpose of syncopating the snare drum passage away from the meter and allowing those accents to dance across the top. Now, I suggested the use of these closed and open drags, and we can have a look at some examples here. The idea of a closed drag is that it lacks a metric value. This means that unlike open drags, a closed drag does not sit on a certain subdivision, even if it's 32nd or 64th notes. The idea of a closed drag, shown by the use of 2 small grace notes, is that it squeezes up right before the note that comes after it. So even if you're playing slowly, you can hear the 2 notes of the drag there are always squeezed up right against it, whereas a metric drag would be more like this, where there is a very clear 1E and 2E and. There's a very clear subdivision there. And this allows us to play with the concept of density. So I'm looking at an example here, and we can see 3 instances of a closed drag, but after the 3rd closed drag, we can see a diddle stroke on the left hand, which is an open drag, and we'll explore another example in a minute that puts this into starker contrast. So when we play through this piece here, this bar, we need to listen to the use of density produced by the closed versus the open drag. It's very difficult to hear it outside of the context, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to hear at tempo as well. But that 3rd closed drag that leads into the left-hand diddle stroke, there's a definite difference in density. So the first 2 strokes on the right hand are our closed drag. But because of the diddle on the left hand, we actually perform a double stroke, an open double stroke, as two 30-second notes. And it changes the way it feels to play. It changes the way we perform it slightly, although we are still trying to articulate the two strokes of the closed drag just as cleanly. And it changes the way it sounds as well because of the density involved. Now, if we explore a section later on in the piece, we find this bar here, which uses a similar device. You can see a few instances of closed drags there, but at the end of the third beat, there is a left-hand diddle stroke into the right-hand accent. This is an open drag. That left-hand diddle stroke is an open drag playing into the accent. But unlike the closed drag that comes before it, it is on the beat. It is on the subdivision. So that left-hand open drag is playing two 30-second notes, exactly as if you were playing a double stroke roll. Whereas the drag that comes before it earlier on in that third beat is a closed drag with those two strokes much more densely compact. So when we hear this bar together, when we hear this bar as a whole, it becomes much clearer to hear the difference between the two drags. If I just play that third bar on its own with the two drags in it, that third beat on its own, it's very subtle. As I say, it gets harder to spot as the tempo gets faster, but there is a definitive change in the way that we perform it and the way that it sounds and the way that it feels as well to the performer. Now, in terms of the performance considerations for this piece, I've already suggested that the vocabulary and the structure is not particularly difficult. The main challenges here, I think, come from the use of stick heights and from the use of relaxation in the fast flam sections. So returning first of all to the flam section running from bar 18, which I've already demonstrated. The hardest part there is maintaining distinction between the flams in a way that means they come from a big enough stick height, and then maintaining a low stick height for the subsequent strokes. See, we really need the accents to stand out there. And one thing I noticed when I was practicing this, when I was a little less familiar with the pattern and I was reading it more than I was just kind of memorizing it or performing it, there was a lot of tension, especially across the knuckles on my right hand, just behind the knuckles across the top of my hand, to do with squeezing. Now, generally speaking, the body, the brain, the muscles, they will squeeze and tense to compensate for a lack of control. So if you are experiencing tension somewhere in your hand or your arm, it usually means you're experiencing a lack of control somewhere where we need it, like the fingers or the fulcrum. And this was certainly the case for me as I was practicing passages like this one. It felt a bit like I was clinging on, and that clinging sensation, the lack of relaxation and the lack of controlled confidence meant that I was experiencing tension in the tendons and muscles across the top of my hand. So that was something I really had to consciously try to reduce so that I was relaxed, I was at ease, and crucially, I was in control when playing those flams. Now, this is essentially, contrary to what many people think, this is not a matter of conditioning. This is a matter of familiarity. The more familiar we are with the phrase we're trying to play, the more confidently controlled and therefore relaxed we're going to be able to play it. So as with many things, slow controlled repetition is the key to allowing us to familiarize ourselves with the passage and to do away with that sense of urgency and clinging on. When we look at the rolls, the fast rolls in this section or in this piece are probably the most difficult technically, just in terms of the raw speed. These are fast rolls. They're not the fastest possible rolls, but they are certainly fast enough to cause a little bit of a challenge. Again, contrary to what we might think, this is not an issue of physical conditioning. This is not about building muscle or endurance or anything like that. It's actually retaining the control to keep the double strokes low enough. One of the best lessons I ever received on the drums was that playing loudly is easy. Anybody can play loudly. The real skill and the real challenge is to learn to play quietly with the same degree of power and control that we have when we play loudly. Now, it seems strange to talk of playing with power yet playing quietly. Yet this is a power that's born from control, which means the dynamic control is completely ours without sort of trying to rely on any loose, weak bounces. We have the skill, we have the power to produce low, quiet strokes, but with the same degree of articulation and control. So if we return now to the opening section from bar 5 and we have a look at these fast roll sections, this is not a big, blazing, large spectacle. This is a much more contained, controlled, as I said, monotonous sound. We're trying to evoke this sensation of trance-like concentration. So really throwing these double strokes out and blazing away with them as fast as you can is missing the point of what we're trying to do here. So again, when I was working on this, it was predominantly the stick heights that took the most of my concentration and my focus. So as you can see here, I'm playing these double strokes from a very low height comparatively to how we might play fast double strokes. In fact, it's very easy to play those double strokes much higher because we're able to throw our arms down and let the power of the stick and the momentum of the stick do most of the work for us. Whereas we're not doing that here. We're trying to maintain the speed and a sense of intensity, but from this lower, more controlled stick height. So as I say, as I'm practicing this, it's the stick heights that's all coming from the fingers. Even though I'm controlling the rebound, I'm doing 2 finger strokes for every double there. And then I'm using this kind of snapped pull-out motion to achieve an accent within actually quite a short time frame, because I haven't got time to do a full formal upstroke. I have to use this molar-esque whipping motion from a very low stick height you can see I'm really trying to whip out the accent there all from here, and there's a lot of work happening in the fingers. It's like casting a fishing line or doing a badminton smash. As the hand comes back, the fingers open, and then that allows us to snap it forwards with the closing of the fingers. But rather than doing it this way over your shoulder, we're doing it this way with a bend in the wrist here. You can see the wrist comes up, the tip of the stick points downwards, almost aiming, pointing to where we're going to throw, and then it's only on that snap at the end that it opens up. So the hand is closed, the wrist comes up, the stick falls back, the hand's open, and then we cast downwards. Now, this is pretty standard Moeller-esque material, right? This is the motion Moeller experienced and observed and described 100 years ago. But this shrinks. This is the idea. Rather than playing in this big Jay Burns Moore style while we're doing this really spectacular sweeping motion like this, the whole idea in this instance is to compress that down to a very short, sharp, fast motion that is small, that can happen within a much shorter time frame. Because remember here, volume and spectacle is not necessarily the main idea. It's trying to achieve this sense of monotonous continuity that we're really after here. So this is generally a simple piece. So I think that's said everything I want to say about it. I really enjoyed performing this one. It was great to give the field drum some nice real-world experience and to get it on camera and on film, on recording in a nice professional setting. I really enjoyed that, and it was lovely actually to play with a tam-tam as well. I can't say I've ever played with a tam-tam drone before, so that was really exciting. But anyway, I hope this piece gives you some enjoyment. I hope you enjoy listening to it. I hope you enjoy performing it, and I hope you have found something interesting in listening to me talk about it. So thank you very much to Arts Council England for funding this project, and thank you for listening and taking an interest in it. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.